Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of SuperFantaFi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Quantum Leap Season 2, Episode 9. Great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So, Ben jumps into the body of a bounty hunter. Well, he's a former cop turned bounty hunter, which I even love. Addison was like, well, you got experience with this. I was like, yeah, it is. Once again, it's always that funny thing when, like, it's never always fully in big ways, but it's always sometimes little ways where it's just, once again, the experiences, everything happens for a reason. That kind of ends up being this conversation of, is there a reason behind the leaps? And it's like, yeah, it does seem to be obviously there was a reason of, well, why the leaps needed to be the way they were. You're kind of basically building up charts so you can go to the future, yada yada, so on and so forth. But it's like in the grand scheme of some cosmic sense, there is something pulling the strings that you need to go through certain leaps, because it's like, hey, you already have experience as a bounty hunter because you went through those leaps last season. You went through a bounty hunter leap last season, so it's interesting. It's funny too because that one was about somewhat saving a relationship. I feel like there's meant to be deeper parallels because that, like, the person he was in, like, was someone in a relationship with another bounty hunter, and that was kind of fixing that situation. And there's kind of there's kind of two relationships that have to be fixed. There's like a brother relationship, and then there's the whole Ben and Hannah thing, which I need to be careful about watching the opening credits, because I kind of got spoiled that she was going to be in this episode because I saw Eliza Taylor's name in opening credits. I mean, it's happened from time to time, but I still have to make more of an effort about that. I just wasn't expecting her to pop up in the episode the way she did. I was making an assumption like, okay, is she going to pop up at the very end of the episode before he leaves? Like, will it be something tragic like that, or will the moment he leaps at the end of the episode, that usually tease up the next leap or whatever, will it be like just as he leaps at the end of the episode and at the start of the next leap, is he like, oh my god, he runs into Hannah? Like, that's when I was curious if it was going to be something like that. It's like, no, she's in a good chunk of the episode. But anyway, he's with kind of a sleazeball Kevin who's kind of, stole money from the wrong people. Like, that he's involved with like an arms dealer, which turns out in the original timeline, that guy ends up killing him. So, and I love Addison's like, yeah, I gave you the PG-13 version of it, tortured him and killed him. It's like, yeah, this doesn't sound like a really good dude. So he probably did some very horrendous stuff for Addison to kind of have to like censor like how he died. But yeah, Kevin's like the slimy dude that's like, yeah, I'm all about getting what's mine and trying to slime my way out of stuff. It's like, hey, I'll bribe you, whatever you're going to get paid for my bounty. Like, I'm going to offer you 2 times as more, 3 times as more, 4 times as more, 5 times as high as I'm going. But it's interesting because, like, Ben wants to believe there's something good about Kevin just because it's like, every time he's ever interacted with anyone, there's usually been good in people. Typically, that's usually why the leaps kind of connect him with certain people, because it's like, yeah, they're good-natured people, but that's kind of being pushed to its limits when Kevin kind of shows time and time again he can be kind of a selfish bastard, because he's all about, what is it? Was it radical selfishness or whatever? Because he's kind of like, the universe never does anything for you, so why do anything for the universe? Because for him, it's just, he's grown up spiteful. It's like, right, it's just been him and his bro for a while, because we find out they're not biological. They grew up in the foster care system together, and they were like brothers, and they looked out for each other. But the younger brother's the one that always kind of he's like, yeah, you have the cool older rebel brother, but then it's like eventually you kind of stop wanting to follow him when you see all the trouble that kind of follows. Because anytime his little brother would get in trouble, he claimed that, like, oh, I would take the fall for it, and so he kind of ends up having the better life. We even found out there was like going to be a grant that was it was like a scholarship that's happening. He busted his ass to become valedictorian, and then he's like, yeah, this he says that the principal or whatever snaked him and gave it to someone else. But we find out later on from his brother, he jeopardized, and it kind of seems on purpose, because it turns out the valedictorianship, the student that snaked it from him was his brother. So it feels like he kind of kneecapped himself in a lot of ways just for the purposes of making his brother's life better. It's kind of like, right, you're better off than me. Because even his younger brother's like, yeah, but he's the one that was smarter. He had the chances. He just kind of screwed them all up. And it's like, either life just happened and it's like, hey, I screwed this up. But it feels too purposeful, because even Ben was noting like, oh, that valedictorianship and scholarship went to you. So it's like he purposely sabotaged himself because he does love his brother. That because it's like, right, all we have is each other, and we have to do whatever we can do to scrape by. But I think in his mind, it's like, yeah, the universe is out to get me. I'm not, I'm not worth it, but my brother, he is. He has more of a chance than me, so, I'm already screwed in the eyes of the universe. Why not keep going down this route and just make things better for my brother in the long run, which is beautiful. Like, he's all about his selfishness, but he can be selfless. As we saw, like, he pulled Ben from the car after it flipped, which I love that whole chase sequence, building up enough dust so that the person following you doesn't know, can't see, and smashes into a tree. But yeah, the car was about to explode and he pulled him out. But even Ben calls him out saying like, yeah, you saved me. He's like, yeah, but that's because I only did it out of self-preservation, because keeping you alive. Well, he's like, no, it wasn't even about keeping you alive. It keeps me alive. It's like, I don't want to have nightmares about you burning to death. So I'm like, just for my own peace of mind, that's the only reason why I saved you. So he seems like such a selfish prick. We end up finding out, like, right, he's like the fun uncle, but then you also find out later on scummy, because the bears he brings his nephew of like, oh, the places I visit. Because once he stole the bear, you're like, oh, that means it's got to be like for a kid or something, and it is for his nephew. Because at first I was like, is he making up the whole having a nephew thing? Because he tried to be like, oh, I have kids. It's like, you have kids? He's like, well, I have a nephew. But it's kind of the same thing. It's like, it's really not. It kind of is, but being an uncle, as I know, being one, you kind of don't have to fully lean into the responsibility. Oh, you get to be fun uncle, and you gotta go, okay, good, go back to your mom. Go back to your mom. She can deal with all the other, like, not so cool aspects, have to deal with you 24/7 when I usually don't have to deal with you hours at a time. Granted, my nieces and nephew are like way older now. They're fucking teenagers now, so that's not as much of an issue, but it's a thing that was kind of more of a thing when they were younger. But either way, so I always think that's funny with the niece and nephew conversation about like, oh yeah, it's the same thing as being an uncle or aunt. It's the same thing as being a parent. In some capacity it is. It depends on the family dynamic and situation. But either way, going back to it, he had hidden the diamonds he had stolen in his nephew's bears, which is like super messed up, because it's like you are inadvertently involving your nephew, because it's like if it ever got found out, you're putting him in the middle of this stuff, which involves an arms dealer who plans on killing you and killed you. Like, who's to say he wouldn't kill a kid just to get rid of some witnesses and stuff like that? So it's like, man, you are kind of all kinds of sucky for that. But the beautiful and complicated twist is that Ben ends up running into Hannah, and obviously Hannah didn't recognize him, and he wasn't going to let Hannah know who he was, because it turns out Hannah is married to Kevin's brother, and it's like, ooh, this is complicated. Oh, this is the episode of juicy, complicated relationships. As we open the episode with Tom and Addison are in an awkward space, and I love that. I guess Addison talked about it with everyone, because Ian's like, okay, so Jen, how would you feel finding out you thought your boyfriend was going to propose to you, but it turns out that he in fact has information to bring back your ex-fiance, who is now in this complicated time love situation with someone else, that you're kind of watching your ex-fiance fall in love in real time. Well, real time is relative considering the leaping and all that, but I'm like, yeah, it's a complicated mess. So, and we also get a little update about the data that was found last episode. Once again, it's too purposeful, Hannah, and all this. Like, he keeps running into Hannah. She's got to be tied to this in some shape or form. Once again, either she's going to end up being Emily's boss somehow, or she's going to be like the data they found is going to be related to, like, maybe Hannah spent her entire life working on a way to make sure that Ben could go back home. So maybe that's it. Like, because there's so much about their tragic story. Because I kept making the parallels of a River Song or Claire and Henry in The Time Traveler's Wife. But there's also a little, like, I don't know if I made this direct parallel before. I should have, but it's like, if I didn't, Captain America, like, especially because that hits even closer to home now too, because season 2 of What If tackles that from a different perspective to Peggy and Steve of it all, in 2 episodes in particular. No spoilers, but yeah, it's just, it's like, do they ever get their happy ending? So, but it's my theory has been like, right, Ben and Hannah are not going to make it. Is going to be like a Peggy thing of when Steve met Peggy again. She was a woman. She had already lived her life, and and this was what I kind of figured was going to happen because and I think I brought this point up previously. It's not fair for Hannah to put her entire life on pause for someone. It's like kind of like the same parallel with Addison. Like she found someone to pick her up out of like that dark spiral she was in. She had every right to move on, and that's something Ben had to kind of come to terms with. It's something Addison's figuring out as she's coming to terms with Ben moving on and figuring out where things between her and Tom are. And so it's like, yeah, it was 9 years and she found someone and she fell in love. And it's like, oh, should she have waited forever? Should she spend her entire life alone, never knowing when the next time she's going to run into Ben? It's, it's a thing of like, she has every right to, and that's why he can't be mad. It's just, it sucks because like, we were literally just together last episode. And that's also the interesting thing too. The time frame in the meeting becomes shorter and shorter because it was like, wasn't it like 2 or 3 leaps in between their previous meeting from because that was like episode 3 and then they met again like 3 episodes later and then they met again like 2 episodes later and now they met again 1 episode later, but the time frame is getting bigger in the perspective of time for Hannah, but the time frame is getting smaller for Ben. So it's that interesting inverse. Once again, very much like the Doctor and River song of like, oh yeah, like the more times I run into him, the less he knows about me because it's like we're meeting each other so out of order in some ways. Which, once again, be interesting if they decided to go down that route with Ben. It has not come up yet. He's kept meeting her in chronological order. There's got to be at least one episode where they meet each other completely out of order. There has to be, just for the complicate things, because it's like, right, do you tell her who you are, but this is before you met, there's got to be, they got to do that. I wonder, will they? Because it is interesting, they just keep happening to meet in chronological order, what about there's time frames like, oh, here's Ben, like there's a 9-year period Ben can end up going back in time and running into her earlier than he did in this episode type of thing, and earlier in her life before he first met her earlier in this, there's just so much time gaps that it could fall in place at any point in time. So, but yeah, I went on my whole diatribe and tangent. It's all relevant to the episode, but still, it's just the sad thing of Ben wasn't going to say anything, but but the problem is he talked to Kevin about it earlier in the episode. He's like, yeah, this girl he met in Cairo. In that moment, like, Hannah's almost like, Ben, like, what are you doing? Like, you were really not going to say anything? Because he's like, I don't know what to say. What the right thing to say is, because you're married, you're a mom. Like, who am I to kind of like throw a wrench in that? But she was happy to see him, and it's even saying like, do you believe that people only have one love? And it's like, I think that's interesting because Ben hasn't really talked about the fact that his hologram, Addison, is his ex-fiance. It's like, he hasn't really broached that conversation with Hannah yet, but it's like, yeah, it kind of put, and it's kind of interesting because Addison's on that other side of things too, where it's like, there's so many two-sided to this relationship thing because obviously Addison has Tom and Ben, but Tom was also married, but his wife died. Now there's Ben, who's in love with Hannah, but once again still loves Addison in a lot of ways. But then it's like, here Hannah is married, and it's just like, she thinks the universe does all this stuff for a reason, that maybe he's like, she's like, maybe it's kind of a test of kind of like faith or whatever. But it's like, yeah, like, because she says like, it's becoming a mom, she learned like, your heart can, like, you can fall in love with someone, and then like having a child, that love inside of you can grow, like you have enough room in your heart for more things. And it's like, maybe I can still love you even though I love my husband and I want to stay with him and be part of his family. It's a complicated situation. I kind of in the grand scheme of things, I saw the twist about it. It took a while, but it wasn't until like his partner was like, okay, I'll come pick you up. I was like, she's selling you out, isn't she? And it turns out because it's like, oh, it's interesting, these people just happen to find you, and it's like, she is the one person in this episode who constantly knows where you and Kevin are ending up, and it's like, yeah, because she's the one behind all of this. So well, not like the one behind all this. The arms dealer dude's the main one behind it, but she has a role to play in all this, selling Nick and Kevin out. But Hannah and Ben construct an idea of like how to handle them, and so it's like, yeah, they're creating like basically they're going to conduct electricity, set up this whole trap. They just needed Kevin like to spit like waste some time to prove like to waste time so they have more time for the setup. And sadly, the lady that works with Nick, the person that Ben is, was wearing like rubber soles, so the electricity didn't conduct. I'm like, man, of course, unlucky. And so they kind of duke it out with her. She's got hands on her because she was like bopping up Ben, but like him and Hannah make quite the team. And I even love Kevin being like, have you two really never met before? It's like, yeah, let's not bundle that bag of worms. Let's not worry about that. But yeah, they ended up taking her down. Well, it ended up being Kevin, because he shot her in the face with the BB gun, specifically in the eye, and then bashed her in the head. And he's like, yeah, you took her down. He's like, actually, I did. He's like, actually, shot her now. It's like, wow, that really can take out your eye. So, but because she's the person he was supposed to drop Kevin off to, it's like, well, she's going to jail now, so Kevin, you get to go free. So, and just kind of gets to wipe his hands of the situation. But this was a learning experience all around because it bettered him, and it also put him and his brother in a better situation. I love his brother being like, wow, this is the first time I've ever seen my brother literally speechless. And so they're definitely in a better spot post all of this. And so it all worked out in the end, because Ben was kind of wondering if like, oh, maybe I was meant to make these brothers get along. Maybe that's what I'm meant to do. And it's like, well, the relationship is repaired, which is beautiful. It's just interesting how it all does work out and reunited you with Hannah. But the sad thing is that we find out that, well, on the good side of things, it turns out that Kevin ended up giving away a lot of the money for the jewels that he sold. Like, he kept some of it, obviously. He starts, it's like something he's, like a business or something he starts in, like, I think South America. But they end up basically putting a lot of the money and dedicating it to like a charity that was kind of started. And the moment Addison Paul's, I was like, is it going to be for Hannah? Because Hannah died. It's like, no, her husband dies 18 months from now from like a brain aneurysm or something. And Ben's like, no, we have to tell Hannah, like, doctors, if they find it soon enough, maybe they can do something about it. And in that moment, he leaps. It's like, that's the tragedy of it. It's like, the universe kept you from wanting. It's like, you didn't. This is the person you love, and you see her, and she's got a family. You don't want to like her to be in pain. So, not unless we end up. Well, I just thought about that, because it's like, I kept wondering, like, could the person that Emily works for, could that be? I'd wondered, like, could it be someone that was related to Hannah, like a grandchild or something? It's like, well, now in the grand scheme of things, it might be Jeffrey, because we did learn, like, oh, that little thing they built together this episode, he is a genius. So it's probably, because that's what I was like, I don't know how old Hannah's supposed to be. So I don't know if she's like, it was like, this is in the 70s. Like, would she even be around the present day? She'd be very, very old if she wasn't. Ergo, what I brought up before, the whole Steve Rogers and Peggy Carter of it all. But it might be a thing of, her son Jeffrey might still be around, and he's the one that Emily works for. So, because I'm like, there has to be a big reveal with that boss situation. And I just figured it had to have some connection to Hannah, and so it's like, especially because if this all relates to data that was found that could help bring Ben home, you figured Hannah would probably be dedicating a lot of her time to it. And maybe that's also why Emily's boss is so interested in this, because his mom might have been interested in that data, so that's where I feel like the connective tissue is kind of flowing. I feel like this is going to be a very crucial episode for Hannah's future, but also what's going on present day, so we'll see. But it's tragic that it's like, here's something that you could at least, you have this future knowledge and you didn't find out to the last minute, and this is someone you love and care about, and it's going to be interesting the next time Hannah and Ben meet, because it's going to be the question of, did you know? And it's like, right, I have this future man on my side, and you couldn't tell me ahead of time that my husband was going to die. It's like, well, we didn't really know. Like, maybe, well, because it didn't come up until later, because it's like, maybe time played out a little differently. Once you change the timeline, you never know what the butterfly effect it is. Like, things played out differently in this timeline for whatever reason. Her husband ended up having things shift just the smallest degree, and it changes so much. So, because yeah, that never came up before now, but it's like once they're kind of like on a new timeline, now it comes up about Hannah's husband dying. So that could be a complicated thing, dealing with, like, right, the person you love is in so much pain right now, and now you can't do anything about it. In fact, you could have warned her ahead of time, because you also have no idea when's the next time you're going to see Hannah. Is it going to be years down the road? Like, losing her husband, what will that do for her? Especially because it's like, not only did she lose her husband, she doesn't know when she's going to see Ben again. Like, there could be another large gap in between. It might not just be 9 years. It could be decades by the time they see each other again. It's just, it's complicated, dude. And it's sad. And that's just the tragedy of, like, the being in love with a time traveler, just like the sad realities of what that story is, you know? Kind of on the flip side of things, relationship wise, Addison ended up talking to Magic about her circumstances. It's like, cool, she was in love with Ben, then thought he was dead and had to grieve him, and then she found Tom, who ended up picking her up and being kind of that rock solid foundation for her. But then it's like, oh, just as she was pulling herself out of that pit, oh, we find out that Ben's alive, and now there's everything between me and Tom. But then I'm also finding out, and I have to sit here and watch as Ben falls in love with someone else, and it's a complicated mess. But it's like, Magic's advice to her was, talk to Tom, like, tell him how you're really feeling. And she does. She confronts him about the ring, and he was going to propose, but it was always just something else was around the corner and never took the time to propose. He had it all planned out, and he ultimately does. Granted, he doesn't get the proposal out before she's like, yes, so they're taking their leap and step forward, but it's kind of, I think it's also that thing of Addison's kind of like, right, Ben's figuring stuff out with his love life. It's time for me to take those steps forward and to figure out where I currently stand. But I think there's also that element of, you realize how short time is we have with the people around us. Like, someone could end up getting sucked up into the quantum accelerator. It ends up like, be zapped around time, and you lose them and then think they're dead for 3 years type of situation. Or you're in love with someone who's, I didn't even think about the parallels of, like, no, like, both Hannah and Addison were in love with, like, Hannah currently is, Addison was, and still kind of is in love with a time traveler, so she kind of had to deal with it the same way. But her, obviously, she can kind of see Ben anytime she wants to. Hannah doesn't have that luxury, sadly, so. But when it's all said and done, it's just, things are working better on one side of things, relationship-wise. That's Addison and Tom, but then there's also, like, Ben and Hannah and how complicated that is. It's like, but one situation does end up ultimately influencing the other. So if it wasn't for one situation be the tragedy that kind of is, this other thing wouldn't be good as it is. So they also haven't told Ben about what they found because they don't know what they found yet. It might be an answer, but they've already gotten Ben's hopes up so many times before, they don't want to dash his hopes again. So there's a lot here. I'm curious to ultimately see where this all ultimately ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.